Mike, welcome to the Huxley Morton podcast. You are the CEO of Idea Pharma. Give us a quick introduction about yourself and your business and some of the fantastic things that you guys have been doing over the past 18 months, or probably more so, closer to home and this year since the pandemic broke out.
Yeah, so I'm CEO at Idea. Idea is a kind of global pharmaceutical consultancy. So we operate purely in the pharmaceutical biotechnology space.
Mm-hmm.
We work with large pharma on helping them figure out how to take the stuff from very early phase through to the market. Advice on commercial, clinical development, and on regulatory strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been a good year. It's been our biggest year ever, which March, April time looked a little bit uncertain, right? But it's been a good time.
I think March, April, nobody around the world knew at all what was going on. I guess for me as a business, we cover international engineering and pharmaceuticals recruitment, but we were hearing whispers of things as early as probably January and February. Completely, maybe I overlooked it. It was like, oh, anything like this is not going to shut down at a city like London. It's just unheard of. Then everything sort of broke out. But look, we'll maybe come onto that. So you guys are offering consultancy services to biotechs and pharma companies to take their drugs from early stage through to market effectively. But I know that you guys have now been going 20 years. Look, to reverse kind of way back, how on earth did you kind of get into this? What was the idea behind Idea, sort of back when you kicked off as a business?
Well, it's like a lot of stories, I suspect, that you hear of people who will tell you the story about planning to be successful, and we never did. We were accidental. So I left the company that I was at, difference of opinion about how they should go forwards. They were just acquired by a large company, which had plans that didn't align with where I wanted to be. So I kind of stepped away and had a really useful period of garden leave, if I would say that, when just I wasn't allowed to get another job for 6 months.
Yeah.
The great news was it coincided with, having my daughter was just born, and meant I wasn't traveling. So, the lifestyle was way more appealing, being on garden leave than going back to the grind. But some clients that I had, wanted me to continue, under the hood, if you like, working with them. So the idea of starting a consulting group kind of came out of that, which was if I earn half as much, this is a much better lifestyle. So we started Idea as a kind of brand name. So it was always planned to be bigger than me at some point, but just to have a operating name. I started in this room actually 20 years ago, 20 years this month.
Wow.
And so a little bit of full circle there. But yeah, and A, it was definitely more fun, and B, we ended up earning a lot more than I had been earning anyway, so before. But the early years were kind of accidental growth, right? We were good at, just naturally good at doing what we were doing. So we kind of grew accidentally into all sorts of stuff. You sort of wind the tape forward a lot. It took a long time for us to realize that, that accidental growth is nice, but actually it creates its own problems. And certainly the idea of growing on purpose. So it came to us about 10 to 5 years ago. And then we spent some time trying to get that right. And probably the last 5 years have been more deliberate, if you like, than so it's 20 years, but you change shape, you pivot, you look at the opportunity, you realize what people really want from you instead of what they think they want, and then mostly focus the activity down. And also for me to get out of my own way and say, look, we need a leadership team that's going to enable this growth to happen.
Okay, so I guess talk to me again about the early days. So it came about almost, not necessarily, well, it is kind of by accident, and it was just through demand from people that you had worked with previously. And that's similar to myself as with a recruitment business. I was one of the top performers at my last firm. I left there after, I just wasn't necessarily enjoying the big corporate structure, etc. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I would maybe go back into just sales training, which is what I'd done previously. And I got pulled back into the industry just, by requests of clients that were a little bit disgruntled that I had either left or they weren't getting the service that they wanted. And here I am kind of 5 years on, going strong and looking to build on it more so. But for yourself, so how big was the team back then when you did kick off? Because I'm guessing your contacts knew you. So how did it go from you to others? Talk me through that process.
Yeah. So, there was me and the dog, and my wife, and you do the kind of the kind of handing around of the phone when it goes. But also a lot of freelance support for, we would take on, digital projects. We take on, strategic work. Some of it I could do solo. Some of it was farmed out. So idea always felt bigger from day one. And the reason it wasn't sort of Mike Rea Consulting was, as you know, some people will need to deal with people of a certain scale. If you're, the world's largest pharmaceutical company, the idea that some bloke called Mike out there who's quite smart is not enough. You need confidence. So we needed to be sustainable in that way. So we, a lot of associates who, actually still work with us 20 years later, who also prefer the freelance lifestyle. Took about 2 or 3 years, and I think a lot of people saw me having fun that they'd like to join in with. So we just kind of started accepting, rebels and mavericks from, people that we'd known along the way. Nice. So I'd say that kind of accidental growth was, come and join us. It's there's plenty of room for everyone, and you create this kind of organic mess. But always, with me at the front of it, there was some semblance of order, but it was, it was like a kind of pirate ship, if you like, of people doing good work, but not not necessarily having a plan.
Yeah, well, look, I guess that I can relate to that. It's similar to us. We've grown organically through demand, and we've kind of tried to just hire people that we know, like, trust into the business, rather than actively going out and saying, oh, we want to hire 5 people this year, 10 people next. And it has been, it's been nice that way, because we've grown with certain clients. If they've had bigger needs, we've said, okay, look, we're not huge. However, we will take on, this individual in order to manage that account, etc. It sounds as though you've done exactly the same. And it's been enjoyable, because you are working with people you like, but also with clients that you like. And you and I touched on that when we spoke originally. And I loved your philosophy on this, is, just the fact that not all business is good business. I think that we agreed on that. And you talked me through a scenario about sort of individuals within teams. So I kind of loved your analogy on that, basketball, rugby, football, etc. Just share that one with us for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, that kind of cultural insight for us was, I think, because of the way that we started, it never felt like, like, I'm going to say, that professional kind of boardroom type approach, which is, you have to chase the numbers. So we had a policy from very early on that our team was really important and the culture is really important. So we wouldn't just take any work. There's some work that we wanted to do and some work that we didn't want to do. And if we didn't like, the ambition of the client, if we didn't like the way that they spoke to us, all those things were sort of small things, we would walk away from work. And there was some concern there, right? Because when you're small, especially when the bills need to be paid, the idea that you'll take the work that comes through the door feels like the obvious thing to do. We didn't do it. And actually, looking back, it was slightly about the sort of pirate ship thing, but also, people who come into work on a Monday want to do great work for great clients. And the more that we've done that, we've taken on work that we enjoy, and where the client has, set a level of ambition where they want great work back, and that two-way challenge has been really important. And then the thing about the sort of size of the team was, also to try and reduce the dependency on any one of us. That I think the basketball, football thing is really important. That when studies are being done on how important a good player is in a basketball team, if you're one of five, you can win the game. If you're a great player, you can win the game all by yourself. So in basketball, you're as good as your strongest player. In football, you're as strong as your weakest player. And in a team of 11. If you've got a terrible defender or you've got a terrible midfielder, that's as strong as your team can be.
Yeah.
And I think then that was an observation as we wanted to grow as well, because I could take care of things when we were 3 to 5. As soon as you get to 10, 11 or 15 or 20, then you actually, the people that you're putting in front of clients. So that confidence, that sort of, it isn't just about the money, it's about the enjoyment that becomes a positive feedback loop. So we've ended up being, ridiculously successful with some of the brands that we've worked on for our clients. But, we're not going to take credit for that. I think that's them being a great client as well as us being able to feed them. And if you start taking the not so good clients, then, all of that changes overnight.
Oh, believe me, I've been there at times. So I absolutely loved it when you explained that, and now I massively agree. It's a case of it. Business is always a two-way street, and it's got to be a mutually beneficial partnership. Otherwise, there's just no point doing it. It's not enjoyable. And if you're waking up on a Monday morning thinking, "Shit, I do not want to do this today," then you're in the wrong job for me. And it's so look, it sounds as though you guys have kind of absolutely nailed that. And that's why you were successful in the early days and grew in the way that you did. It sounds like when you and I last spoke, you said maybe the last sort of 10 years, or certainly the last 5, is when you guys have said, look, there's something that's really happening here. We need to have systems, processes, and really start looking at this from a business perspective rather than, our own little journey and venture. So how have things changed for you guys in the last 5 years? What have you done differently to take you from where you were running the lifestyle type business to what you're doing now?
So I think, we have, and I think that some of it was about saying, look, if you start to behave like the people you want to become instead of the people that you've been. One of the reasons clients liked us was that they would get access to the senior folks, to kind of, the people that they wanted to work with. But if you try and do that, and you try and run the business, and you try and, talk to the bank manager, and you try and do all those things, and you try and do the hiring, and, it's there's a recipe for disaster that way. And I think that was what we saw, right? We saw the sort of instability of trying to do everything, everyone chasing the ball around the field. Is that you've got to play in position, and some people are great at being a goalkeeper, some people are great at being a defender, and they like doing it, and they're really good at it, and actually that's a foundation to build on. So I definitely, we look back and said, look, people like us for this, but there's a lot of things that we could do to improve, so we can do that more, and we can scale it, and we can have, the ability to reach more great clients. So, things like hiring. We hired a chairman who, had been a FTSE 100 CEO. Lucky enough to know him, but actually, there's a role for someone like that who knows how to scale businesses, who knows how to do deals. There's someone, we need to listen to a good finance person. And even then, say 10 years ago, we'd said, look, we need someone to be in charge of this. You don't necessarily get the right person the first time around. So you learn by, realizing that some people sound confident but are not right. And you go through a process. So really, this was about trying to find the right people who, shared the values, distributed the load. Some people like hiring, and they like managing, and they like that kind of stuff. And if you're not good at it, best thing to do is to recognize it and say that there's a thing that we can build here, and distribute the, play like a team, people in their positions, instead of, relying on one person to win the game.
Exactly. I know it sounds as though it's kind of your vision, but you brought in a backing group to say, okay, look, I can't do it all myself. And you're quite, you're very open about it, and you admit that, you're not best placed in certain areas, right? And you know, that's what I like about the fact that you're very transparent on that, and you've said, hands up, this is where I can use support. So how has that planned or played out for you guys? Because I know there's most entrepreneurs, myself included, it's normally quite hard to let go of the reins. And like for me, I want things done in a certain way, and that's my vision for the business. I want, service to be absolutely the pinnacle of what we do for recruitment. And the way that I've had to do that is to put in specific systems, and so that it can almost be templated of, this is how we do it at Huxley Morton. Have you guys done the same, or what processes and things have you brought to the table that have allowed you to keep that, dynamic feel that you had in the early days?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of introspection needed. I think that you as an individual and as a company need to see where your strengths are and weaknesses are, because we might be quite good, but if we're letting, if the slides aren't any good, then people can't use us. I mean, it's, there's very basic stuff. And I think the same is true with the skills. Is you need some operating tension. You need someone that tells you that you're wrong. You need someone, and you need to trust the people who are good at the other stuff. I mean, I'm very lucky that I was well aware of my weaknesses, right? You do all of the sort of, the Belbin tests and all the other things. I peak in a couple of areas, but not very many. So I wasn't a control freak. But the downside of that was I also had to learn not to be too comfortable to hand everything off. So, you hire a CFO and you let them do it, and then you wonder why you've got no money. And then you look at why they're doing, what they're doing, and then you go, wow, that wasn't very smart. So the idea of giving enough rope, but not delegating all of the responsibility was learning. I think that, the role of systems, I think, is not to import somebody else's. We had to look at what we were doing that was active, and valuable, and also look at what we were doing that was active and not so good. And that becomes part of the training, right? If you're going to bring people in and teach them, it can't just be, Mike's an industry veteran and he knows what he's doing. You go, well, yes, but he's not magic. There's got to be a thing that he's doing that is repeatable, right? And that we can do on purpose. And the great thing is, in a consulting group is, you get paid for the amount of work you do, not for the insight that you had at 2 a.m. on a Sunday night. So that forms a kind of basis for saying, look, the thing is repeatable. Yeah. And it isn't just about us giving them an answer. It's got to be about them working their own way through it, so they arrive at an answer that they're happy with. And actually that became how we built this out, and said, look, we're going to teach you the magic. We're going to show you the kind of the way that it happens. We're going to help you collaborate. We're going to help you ideate. We're going to help you come up with your answer. And it's going to be a better answer because you came to us than if you went somewhere else. But if we hadn't been able to kind of, pull the ingredients out of the special sauce, it wouldn't be scalable in that way.
Yeah, but that's, I think what I like there is, just how much of a focus there has been on the communication and collaboration side of things. Because for me, no matter what business it is and what you're doing, if you work with your clients in a way that they want to work, you can't go too far wrong, right? It's kind of like they're happy, you're happy, and it is that mutually beneficial collaboration that you're looking for. And if you're getting the results that go with that, it's kind of win-win for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and breaking through that, things that you assume they know about you and things that, they assume you know about them. I think the more dialogue, the more, especially if you've got long relationships. Yeah. I think you sort of hope that there's a tacit understanding of what you both want. But I meid sometimes it's better to make that explicit rather than implicit, so that, you know both what you're working to. That's much easier to hand to your colleagues. If they've got to keep coming back to you and to say, do you think that they want this, or do you think they don't want that? That's wearing. I think the idea of saying, look, some of the system needs to be about, making sure that we both agree, and that we've both had a chance to say what's possible and what's desirable, and and some of the parameters that might matter. And we're not too ashamed to say, look, it's more important that the client gets this in a month than that it's the best thing they've ever seen. That might be really what's driving their request of us. So and I think that kind of stuff comes from dialogue.
And again, I would agree. You know, many of the time we've had similar conversation with our clients when they're hiring staff. It could be an absolutely critical role, and yes, you would like to get Superman into that role, but sometimes if the activities that individual is going to be doing is so critical, is it not better to get it done than to have it perfect? And yeah, I think, you know, I'd agree with that. But so coming on, you know, in terms of your role now as the CEO, talk us through your typical day, because you've got operations running over in the States now as well, right? So how does your typical day made up now? What's the best part about your job? What's, you know, perhaps one of the more irritating, if you ever involved with the IT, that's my bugbearer. But yeah, talk us through your role now.
That's pretty easy. I've always been an Apple fan, so from day one we've been Apple. So you know that made life a lot easier on the IT front. Well, actually, a typical day is an odd thing because you know we've got a range of clients, a range of different things, but so I kind of touch those a little bit. You know, you've got to interact with them, and that's part of the pitch is that you know you do get the senior folks when you work with us. But a lot of the job that I've had to get comfortable with as a CEO, instead of just being a good consultant, has been the thought leadership, the communication, the kind of essentially the selling of a company at a kind of macro scale. Yeah. So, you know, I spent time on social media that, you know, could easily just be a distraction, but you got to do it on purpose. You know, and some of that thing about, you know, spending time with the folks internally and making sure that, I mean, you know, you think you've said something and then you realize that you've got to say it 20 times to have it really be something that people believe that you mean, you know, that kind of stuff. So there's also been this journey. So portfolio approach to, you know, engaging new clients, you know, learning that at our level, even at our level, you know, because we're not huge, that there are people who are comfortable to interact with me, you know, at a certain level, you know, CXO sort of level in a pharma company, and then you know, but then there's matching and of different people within our organization at different levels in there as well. So some of it's just constant contact, and you know, 2020 has been a great example of that. That you know, usually you fly around the world and sit down and have coffee, and now you're doing virtual coffees. You know, so you know, the afternoon Santa Monica, the morning might be Basel, but it's you know, you got to know what they want to get done as well. So some of it's almost new product development. We're sort of, you know, trying to further our leadership in some of the areas that we're doing. So some of it's product design. And I think, you know, you'll say the same thing. I think if you're engaged with the day-to-day, it's easier to do the kind of stuff which is about thinking about new ideas. So it's, you know, I'm not a particularly focused individual. So, you know, the kind of then the mosaic is much easier for me to deal with, and which might just be sort of self-fulfilling. But you know, I think I'm quite comfortable with the job of sort of being sort of chief business developer and chief salesman for the organization.
Nice. So look, you mentioned there that, you know, often, I guess prior to the pandemic, because I know that a lot of flights just for our business have been cancelled, you know, months ago, borders were all shut. So you're not necessarily flying out and jetting here, there and everywhere for coffee. So paint a picture of how that's changed and how the digital landscape and way of working, how has that impacted business for you guys? I mean, you're working in the world of pharma, which has just exploded at the moment anyway. How has this year, you know, looked for yourself? Have you faced many challenges with, you know, furlough, working from home, having the dogs biting at your ankles while you're trying to sit on your Mac there? You know, how have things changed?
So I think you always need to reflect the privilege or the sort of the luck that you have, right? So I mean, we're lucky that we're in an industry that is relatively distributed. So, you know, so we've got offices in New York, you know, Switzerland, San Francisco. We've got clients in those places and more. So we always had to have some virtual nature to what we were doing anyway, just to be able to deal with that. But a lot of it was based around this idea that, you know, they would collect in a certain room on a certain day and you'd focus on the workshops. So the first thing was, you know, February, March time was how long is this going to last? Is it transient, or are we going back to normal in 3 months time or not? So I think Q2 was hard this year, right? It's because everyone was trying to get used to, let's just wait for this to go away and then we'll be back to normal.
Yeah.
So things that were interesting were, things like contract signing and so on would often take like 3 months longer than it had. So we were, waiting for new business to drop, and it would take longer just to get to the point when, everyone had aligned on that. But as soon as everyone realized Zoom is great, and these things are that used to happen on a teleconference now happening on, and you can see people and you can show them slides and you can do all the. I think our industry been waiting for that kick to make it happen. We almost got too comfortable just getting on a plane and going and flying to somewhere for a 2-hour meeting and then flying home. Too comfortable with that. This is, I think, a way of doing things more quickly. Maybe not as well, but I always think that a good answer quickly is often better than a really good answer in 3 months' time. So we sort of leaned into that. We were lucky that we had a client last year who told us, look, we're in 6 different places, so all of our meetings will have to be virtual. So we'd started to work with that idea anyway, even before this happened. So, and then the great news was, I think some of this kind of external business development, social media, that kind of stuff, we've got a pretty good footprint out there in the industry. People know who we are, and so the second half of this year has been crazy as people have been sort of getting in touch with us for work, and so the more that we've done content, the more we've done thought leadership, the kind of this virtuous circle, if you like, of they're used to the way the world is now. They know how to reach us. All those things have been good, and it's been the biggest year we've ever had. So
amazing, impressive stuff. And it's incredible, isn't it, how things have changed from phone calls. And for me, going back 10 years, I would never do any business without meeting someone. Now it's kind of pick up the phone, and then the phone isn't necessarily good enough. It's okay, guys, should we jump on Teams? Should we jump on Zoom? What platform are you using? And nothing kind of gets done without that these days. And it's just so widely accepted. So it's crazy. I know that's one of the big things that I've learned about myself over probably the last 6 months is just being able to adapt and actually take on the new innovation, which I probably should have done years ago, looking at it, but I was stuck in my ways, and it's brought this situation to actually push me into it. But it's been amazing for us as a business. It sounds as though it has had similar effects for you guys. But what I guess maybe challenges and what have you learned about yourself, Mike, over this period where things have changed?
Well, I think I mean, you could say when you jump off the treadmill, and because I was used to being on a plane 2 or 3 times a week, mostly transatlantic, and that is you just don't realize that that's a treadmill until it stops.
Strange feeling.
I'm not naturally sociable, so this being at home is, I'm a natural introvert. You've got to be cautious about enjoying it too much. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's easy for me, right? I'm in a room that I have always loved sitting in. I've got my dogs around me. It's easy for me. I know some of the folks that work for us don't. They're in their parents' house and they're on a 2 megabyte sort of dial-in connection. Not the same experience. So we've focused a lot on culture, which was something I've not thought about actively before. And how do you maintain culture in a place where you're not meeting and doing the kind of, because one of the side effects of traveling was spending time on planes, in airports, in bars the night before a meeting, in restaurants over dinner, and often seeing how people are in 3 dimensions. If you can't do that, and you say this thing about hiring is, we always had this thing is, would you hire someone you didn't want to take an 8-hour flight with? So we've always had this idea, and of course that's an interesting thing. So how do you find out about someone online? So we've had to, we do this thing now called a roundup every week, where we do a 1-hour Zoom call, but it's about everything but work. So we ask people to do Zoom backgrounds of their scenes from their favorite movies, or or their favorite album of all time, and just so the conversation is about everything but work.
Amazing. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Good
And
that
it's almost accidental. You find, oh, I had no idea about that about you. And then something that happened was that the US folks, the New York team, was saying, actually, I've learned more about our UK colleagues this year than we've ever learned before, because we're sort of doing this deliberate stuff. So
yeah.
I think if you're resilient and you lean into it, I think most situations have got something to teach you. And for me, I've always had this sort of largely anti-consulting kind of mindset. You know, I hate McKinsey and I hate that kind of idea of things. Of course, this is a big level set as well, because, you know, they've always had the advantage of geography. They're at the client there. Well, there's some leveling up going on at the minute. So trying to lean into that and say, let's, you know, what kind of opportunities does this present, and how can we get our hands around it?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mirror that. I love the idea of the Zoom thing, but yeah, I think you're spot on with the internal teams and who you work with. I mean, we covered it sort of in brief earlier, but it's everything, isn't it? You spend so much of your time, or typically in an office, you know, getting to know people. And a lot of my good friends in the past have been working at that time. You then leave and then realize actually you're not speaking to them anymore. So you kind of know everything about them and what's going on in their world for that period that you've worked with them. But with the whole Zoom and Teams scenario, you're not getting that level. So I think that's a great initiative that you've put in place for your guys. So that you still got that camaraderie almost. And it makes you are then a business rather than just a group of individuals, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think it's the worst thing in the world is when you see someone as the job that they're doing. And I think, you know, we've often, you listen to the way people introduce themselves on kind of group calls, and it's like, you know, this is me and this is the job that I do. And you go, well, I know nothing about you now, other than, you know, what you've chosen to do. And, like, you know, as you mentioned that, you know, you're a boxer, right? You know, so
has been.
Doesn't matter. I think that kind of thing is dimension to someone that you wouldn't otherwise know. You know, seeing whether they smile a lot, or seeing, you know, those kinds of things, seeing whether they look anxious. I think we're used to these cues, right, as humans, and it's such a key part of collaboration is almost the vulnerability of teams. There's a great observation in sort of collaboration that humor is so important, especially to the Brits. And someone in psychology did this sort of video of chimpanzees with each other.
Right.
And they were sort of giggling to each other. And when you slow it down, it sounds a lot like humans. And the sort of the observation was, you know, we often use humor as a way of saying, like, I'm not sure this is a great idea, but, you know, and when we're talking to each other, we use sort of humor and kind of smiles, and, you know, the sort of vulnerability is communicated, which is don't hate me, but. And I think that kind of thing, you've really got to say, well, if you want people to collaborate together, they've got to be able to offer up half-baked ideas or what ifs, or and not be judged for doing it. So trying to keep that kind of thing going has been critical.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that all develops over sort of, you know, the next 12 months with everyone becoming more accepting and more businesses adapting this, because we've all had to. I mean, I still don't think it's going to be exactly the same as sitting in the office and, you know, things flying about above your head at times, as, you know, they have done in the sales offices that I've worked in. But, you know, you want to have some sort of, you know, you need to be able to have a laugh at work as well, even if you are kind of removed from all of your colleagues. So I agree on that. And look, you know, I'm optimistic and just hoping that things will start to become more normal and we will be able to start to get back out. But look, it'd be crazy not to mention, you know, kind of the elephant in the room at the moment, which is the vaccines, which, you know, we saw sort of the government discussing this week and talking about rolling it out as early as next week. What are your thoughts? I guess, look, you're not a pharma business yourself, but you're speaking to them all the time, like I am. What are your thoughts on the vaccines? And what do you envisage for, say, the world of clinical research and pharma and your clients as we head into next year?
So it's we do advise one of the vaccine manufacturers. So it's you know, I think it's been a remarkable year. You talk about resilience and pivoting. You know, our industry has done just a remarkable job this year. There's a book, I've got this book club podcast that I do, and one of the books that was written this year was called Biotech in the Time of COVID. And in it, the guy who's the CEO at Moderna, who's one of the kind of key vaccine that we're going to rely on, describes his January and February, week by week in the book. And he's written this in like April, May. Right. So he describes week by week what he was doing in China and other places. Wow. You got some huge insight into the way the biotech could work in our industry and the kind of speed that it comes at. But, I think it's really important, right? We haven't really had to deal with a kind of global disease like this for a long time. We're going to have a vaccine, fortunately. We couldn't have hoped or even dreamed of the kind of level of effectiveness that this thing seems to have. All of the vaccines seem to have a good level. So, then it becomes, I've been involved this year in the kind of ethical sort of questions about who gets them first and how, and, is it, not just within the country, but across the world, who should be getting them first. And these are really interesting questions, but, then you think, well, what do we, how do we move through getting everyone to help us protect ourselves in this dimension? But yeah, the kind of, we've heard great stories this year from people that have had to stop a lot of their clinical studies because if people weren't presenting for their cancer, treatments, then they couldn't present for cancer clinical studies. But I think a lot of those things are great because it will help the shift, a bit like Zoom calls do, to things like decentralized studies, so where people can do them from wherever they are and they get monitored remotely and so on. So that world of innovation that's been waiting to kick in has had an opportunity to do it that it wouldn't have had if we just had business as usual, because most large companies like business as usual. They haven't been able to do it. So this kind of world in which Zoom calls and remote monitoring of patients, remote delivery of care, a lot of that innovation, I think will change things, and suddenly we'll look back and go, this is more attractive. And the analogy I always use is, I don't know how well you know Manchester, but remember when the Arndale Centre in Manchester was...
A few times when I was younger for boxing and training camps and things, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I lived there about 25 years ago. It was when the Arndale Centre there was blown up by a bomb, disastrous. Fortunately, no one was killed or injured. But everyone had hated that building anyway, so suddenly you got this thing taken out by accident or by design, but at least, fortunately no one was hurt. And then Manchester transforms in the presence of like the opportunity to do something different. Well, no one would have done it. No one would have ever voted in a council meeting to just knock it down and start again. Yeah. And I think this refresh is a little bit the same as that, with the opportunity to build something bigger and better. The hiring stuff. I was talking to someone who's head of innovation at one of the 10 largest companies last week. He said, we've always had this issue getting people to come and live here. They're not in the most attractive part of the world. So he said, but now we're thinking we can hire people wherever they are. Yeah. To China, India, if they're the best people, we can hire them and they can have the lifestyle they enjoy and they can work together. So I think there'll be lots of good to come out of this once we get people moving again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think you're spot on there, and it's kind of the remote hiring and the hiring landscape is something that, as a recruitment business owner, that we know about, and it's just kind of blown things up. The fact that people can have access to people all around the world has just meant there's so much more competition. Things are so fast paced. It's gone crazy. But look, before we wrap things up, that we touched on it a second ago, and when talking about our own teams and getting people involved, hearing about the actual person. So look, we've heard about sort of idea and how you guys have grown over the past 20 years. But look, outside of sort of the world of business, what do you like to do to enjoy yourself? I've seen on your profile that you're involved in sort of a music record label. You play AFL or did, and sort of launched a league on that side of things. You seem like quite an interesting character, even taking the business and entrepreneurial side of things out of it. What do you get up to in your spare time, Mike? Just give us a quick overview of that side of things.
Well, that's where the LinkedIn resume probably looks more exciting than the reality. It's I did university. I played American football, and I wanted to. Nothing existed, so I created a team, and then and this is in the 80s, right? So we and then we needed someone to play, So we created a league, and there were 2 teams in it when we started, and now it's affiliated to the NFL. So that's
Wow.
so that was not, and that was I'm going to say I'm very distractible. That was one of the things that meant I didn't get a great university degree. was starting something like that.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I was I've always been a music fan, always done a lot, and I was a critic for MTV for a while.
All right.
And
How did that come about?
complete random accident. I just got chatting to a guy in a record shop, and and things went.
Wow.
And I said, I've always enjoyed writing, and he said, well, have you ever thought of reviewing albums? Oh yeah, obviously I have. So and the gig came about. This was in the sort of teletext CFAX days, and we used to sort of write album reviews. And then actually when I started this, we also syndicated a music and album review column. And for a while, it was the most widely syndicated album review column in the UK, so around local newspapers and so on. So, but then I got to the point you start to get, too much stuff that you don't like anymore. The genres change on you. So, and someone I met said, look, he'd always wanted to work at a record label. I said, well, I've always fancied having one. So we started one of those. Which is never broken even. So, so you talk about being a serial entrepreneur. I'm definitely not that. But it's, I think there's a lot of good music out in the world that wouldn't have been if we hadn't done it. So it's the thing my wife hates most.
Yeah.
And then I've got 3 dogs. I would have another 10. My wife keeps a tab on that as well. We work with a couple of dog charities to do sort of rehoming and that kind of stuff. So, so
Few things to keep you busy then, by the sounds of things. And for a self-confessed introvert, you certainly seem to have put yourself out there in the past. Anyway, with setting up a business, record label, American football leagues. It's not normally what you would expect from someone who claims to be an introvert. So no, impressive, stuff, I might have to say.
I think mostly just an accidental. If something doesn't exist, I tend to say why not, rather than worry too much or even think too far ahead. Maybe that's the characteristic.
Amazing stuff. Well, look, thanks very much for coming on the show, Mike. It's been amazing having you. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out as we go into 2021. And look, I'll definitely be keeping in contact just to see how things go. I'm interested to hear about how the advice that you've been given to your clients now has been panning out. And look, if things continue to go as successfully as they have by accident, then now that you've got a strategy in place, look, God knows what's going to happen with Idea. I'm sure it's going to blow up over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, if we continue to get great people, I think that's obviously you want to be an attractive place for people to work as well. So try and keep that going because that's going to be such a huge part of what we do next.
Yeah, definitely. Look, Mike, thanks very much again, and we will speak soon.
Thank you so much, James.
All right, good man.